They found the manifest on a dead ship. Not a warship, a cargo hauler venting atmosphere from 3 separate hull breaches, drifting through the debris field at the edge of the Karanath system, with its lights still blinking in the automated distress pattern. The Voth survey vessel asterisk immovable premise pulled it in out of protocol obligation, not compassion. The Voth did not practice compassion towards species they had already categorized. Humanity had been categorized 14 months prior. The manifest was what stopped senior analyst Verath from filing the standard salvage report. It was a shipping document, mundane by any measure, columns of cargo weights, destination codes, registry numbers. But one column made no sense. A column labeled in human script, Fleet Auxiliary Shadow Log, ROUTING copy 7 of 7. 7 copies. Verath read it 3 times. Then she did something she had never done in 19 years of survey work. She called her superior before finishing the report. "You need to see this," she said. "I think we've been counting the wrong ships." The Voth Consolidated Fleet had spent the better part of 2 standard years compiling what its Strategic Intelligence Division called the most comprehensive military census in the organization's 400-year history. Every human warship, every registered hull, every drydock record they could extract from captured databases, intercepted transmissions, and the 17 human prisoners who had been interviewed at length, a word the Voth used as a neutral administrative term, and which the humans apparently did not accept as neutral at all, based on their behavioral responses during the process. The final count had been submitted to the conclave of Reach 3 months ago. 412 warships, aging, underlaunched, their propulsion systems a full technological generation behind Voth standard. Their armor composites were adequate. Their weapons were creative in a disorganized way that the Voth analysts found mildly interesting and ultimately insufficient. The conclave had reviewed the census and issued a single directive: proceed at optimal timeline. 412 ships. The Voth could field 3,000, not counting auxiliaries. The math was not complicated. What Verath was holding was complicated. She brought it to Fleet Marshal Dorath 7 aboard the command station Certainty of Outcome Asterisk, which was anchored in high orbit above the human colony world of Meridian 4, close enough that its shadow crossed the Terminator line every 9 hours like a slow, patient threat. Dorath 7 was a being of immense institutional patience. He had overseen the absorption of 4 species into the consolidated structure. He did not panic. He did not speculate. He processed. He processed the manifest for 11 minutes in silence. "Routing copy 7 of 7, he said finally. "Yes, Marshal." "Which means there are 6 other copies of this document." "Or were, yes." He set it down on his analysis surface. "This could be a fabrication, a deliberate plan on a ship they expected us to recover." "It could," Verath said. "The ship's black box confirms it lost propulsion control 4 days before we found it. No indication of crew evacuation. It was a genuine accident." "Humans have accidents." "Humans have many accidents, Marshal. That has been consistently documented." She paused. "But this document references a routing system we have no record of. Shadow log. The terminology appears in no intercepted communication. No prisoner mentioned it. It is not in any database we recovered." Dorath 7 was quiet for a long moment. Outside the viewport, Meridian 4 turned slowly, its cloud cover bright and indifferent. "How many ships," he asked, "does this routing copy reference?" Verath had been waiting for this question, with a feeling she did not have a clinical term for. She had been waiting for it the way you wait to tell someone something that will change them. "The document itself only references cargo weight distributions," she said. "Supply tonnages, fuel allocation ratios." She placed a secondary file on the surface beside the manifest. But if you back-calculate from those ratios, using standard human naval consumption figures. How many? She met his eyes. Somewhere between 900 and 1,400 additional hulls. The room was very quiet. That, Dorath 7 said slowly, is not possible. We counted every human shipyard. Marshal, Varath's voice was careful. I believe that is exactly what they wanted us to think. The first misinterpretation had happened before the war formally began. 18 months prior, a Voth intelligence team had intercepted a transmission from a human deep space facility designated Research Station Korval. The transmission had been flagged because it used a rotating cipher system that took the Voth's best computational arrays 9 days to crack, an unusual investment of encryption for what turned out to be, on its surface, a routine personnel reassignment notice. 43 engineers being transferred from Korval to an unspecified secondary location. The Voth analysts had concluded, reasonably, that the encryption investment was disproportionate to the content. Their interpretation: the humans were testing a new cipher and using a low-value transmission as the test vehicle. They had logged it, filed it, and moved on. Nobody had asked why 43 engineers at a deep space research station would need to be transferred simultaneously, or where unspecified secondary location actually was. Nobody had asked because the cipher itself had consumed all the attention. The humans had understood that it would. The 43 engineers had been building something. The question, the first of the three mysteries now beginning to press against Varath's thinking like fingers against thin glass, was what? Commander Ilara Voss heard about the Voth finding the manifest on a Tuesday, which was a designation that meant nothing out here in the dark between stars, but which she had maintained on her personal calendar because she believed small rituals of normalcy were a form of operational armor. She was in the engineering bay of the unregistered, which was what the crew called it, because its official designation was a 47-character alphanumeric string that nobody used. The ship smelled of recycled air and machine oil, and the particular dry, metallic scent of electrical systems running at sustained high output. She had been on it for 8 months. She knew every sound it made. Her second-in-command, a man named Tors whose eyebrows had been partially burned off during a reactor calibration incident 4 months ago, and who had declined cosmetic correction on philosophical grounds, found her elbow-deep in a conduit panel. They found the Haverson Manifest, he said. She didn't look up. Which copy? 7. So they have the least useful one. She extracted a relay connector, examined it, set it aside. How long before they back-calculate? Analysts say 6 hours, maybe 8 if their math is conservative. Their math is never conservative. She stood, wiping her hands on a work rag. What's our current fleet position? All 1,041 hulls holding at waypoint Kessler, dark running, full emission suppression. She nodded slowly. Outside the narrow viewport near the conduit panel she could see nothing, absolutely nothing, which was correct, which was the point. They're going to panic, she said. When they figure it out, Dorath 7 is going to panic in a very controlled, institutional way that looks exactly like not panicking. And then he's going to do something smart and wrong. She picked up the relay connector again, turned it in her fingers. So we need to be ready for him to be smart. Tors looked at her for a moment. Commander, they have 3,000 ships. I know. We have 1,041, most of which are a class that has never been combat tested at scale, crewed by people who volunteered for a program that officially doesn't exist, to fight a war that the public record shows we are losing. I know, Tors. I just want to make sure we're sharing the same information. She almost smiled. It didn't quite reach. Get me a link to the fleet Commodore, and someone bring me coffee. Real coffee, not the recycler output. I know Chen has been hoarding the actual stuff. The second misinterpretation had unfolded over the course of 3 months, and it had been more consequential than the first. The Voth had observed, through long-range sensor arrays positioned at the edge of the system, a pattern of human shipping traffic that passed through a region of space they had dismissed as tactically irrelevant. A dense dust cloud designated by their cartographers as Obstruction 7, which was exactly as unglamorous a name as it sounds, and which had been dismissed because sensor penetration through its outer boundary was poor, and the cloud's interior offered no strategically significant stellar objects. The human ships that entered Obstruction 7 were logged as mining vessels. The Voth had seen their hull signatures, their registry broadcasts, their cargo declarations. They had cross-referenced the registry numbers against their comprehensive database of human civilian vessels and confirmed these were legitimate mining operations, working the dust cloud's interior for trace mineral deposits of marginal value. 12 ships over 3 months. In and out, irregular intervals, consistent with opportunistic mining behavior. What the Voth had not considered, because it violated the logical framework of how civilizations use their resources, was that a civilization expecting war does not continue operating marginal mining sites in strategically irrelevant locations. Unless the location is not irrelevant. Unless the ships are not mining. Unless the registry numbers are real and attached to vessels that have been structurally modified to the point where the hull signature matches the registry entry, but the interior does not resemble the original vessel in any meaningful way. The Voth had been watching the construction crews rotate in and out for 3 months. They had congratulated themselves on their thorough surveillance of the human civilian economy. Inside Obstruction 7, the last of the Hidden Fleet's repair bays had gone fully operational 6 weeks ago. Verath had been given a temporary assignment to the Asterisk Certainty of Outcome Asterisk S Strategic Intelligence Team. She was not certain this was a reward. Dorath 7 moved quickly once he accepted the numbers. He was, as Voss had predicted, smart. He immediately ordered a full resweep of all surveilled regions, every sensor array recalibrated for the specific emission signature of ships running suppressed output configurations. He ordered intercepts of all human shipping traffic for the previous 8 months, looking for the pattern that should have been visible in retrospect. He found Obstruction 7 on the 3rd day. "There," said the analysis officer, highlighting the dust cloud on the tactical display. 12 vessels logged through that region over 93 days. Registry-confirmed civilian mining fleet. He paused. But the mass displacement readings on 6 of the entries are inconsistent with their declared cargo loads, by a factor of. "How large a factor?" Dorath 7 said. 3.8, nearly 4 times the declared mass. The analysis officer did not say what that implied. He didn't need to. A vessel carrying 4 times its declared mass was not carrying ore. It was carrying equipment, or people, or both. "The cloud blocks interior sensing," Dorath 7 said. "Significantly, yes. We'd need to send a probe. We'd need to send a fleet." He studied the display for a long moment. Meridian 4 rotated somewhere behind him, clouds still bright, still indifferent. They built something in there. "Marshal," Verath spoke carefully from her position at the secondary console, "if I may." "Speaker." "The manifest references a routing system we haven't identified. Shadow log. If the ships using that routing system were serviced at a facility inside that cloud." She stopped. She reorganized the words. "We have been assuming the Hidden Fleet is assembled and waiting somewhere. But what if the question isn't where they asterisk are asterisk, Marshal? What if the question is where they've asterisk been?" Dorath 7 turned to look at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not exactly fear. It was something that sat adjacent to fear. Something that happened when a being of great institutional confidence suddenly realizes the institution's confidence was based on a flawed premise. Explain, he said quietly. The manifest is a routing copy. Copy 7 of 7. Routing documents track *movement*, not position *. If these ships have been moving on a schedule through a system we couldn't see, then our sensor sweeps would have only ever captured them between positions, he said slowly. We would see empty space. We would assume empty space meant empty space. Yes, Marshal. He looked at the tactical display for a long time. The stars did not move. They never moved from this perspective. They only appeared to because the observer was the thing that actually changed position. I need to know, he said, what this fleet has been doing for the past year, not where it is, what it has done. It took his analysts 4 more hours to begin to find the answer, and when they did, it rewrote everything they thought they understood about the war they were already fighting. The hidden fleet had not been waiting. This was the revelation that changed the shape of everything, that fell across the previous 14 months of Voth strategic planning like a light turned on, in a room you had been navigating confidently in the dark, suddenly showing you that what you had taken for walls were openings, and what you had taken for empty floor was a staircase going down. The hidden fleet had been working. The Voth pulled the records in pieces, cross-referencing time-stamped anomalies they had logged and dismissed across dozens of systems. 3 Voth resupply convoys that had arrived at their destinations 4 to 8 hours late, their commanders citing navigational delays, minor equipment variants, nothing of note. Examined now against the shadow log routing schedule, those delays coincided precisely with times when the human fleet would have been transiting those same corridors under full emission suppression. They had been sharing the same space lanes. The Voth convoys had been delayed because something very large and very dark was already occupying the transit corridor, running silent, and the human fleet had to clear it before the Voth ships could proceed without noticing. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. The part that changed everything was the supply depot at Vaxis Station. Vaxis Station was a Voth logistics hub, hardened, automated, deep inside what the Voth had categorized as secured territory, 6 jumps from the front lines. It had experienced a catastrophic power systems failure 8 months ago that had taken its primary fabrication capacity offline for 11 weeks. The investigation had concluded: equipment age, cascading failure, no external cause. The shadow log routing schedule showed a human fleet element, 47 ships, passing through the Vaxis system on a date that fell precisely within the window of the power failure. Not an equipment failure, a surgical strike. 47 ships, dark and quiet, in and out, no signatures, no survivors to report contact, no evidence that wasn't already explained away by the automated failure diagnostic. They had been hitting Voth logistics infrastructure for months, one target at a time, carefully leaving explanations behind them. Not a fleet in waiting, a fleet in motion, invisible, systematic, already at war. They didn't build these ships to threaten us, Varath said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, lower and more careful. They built them to already be using them. The manifest we found isn't from a ship that was lost. It was from a ship that was. She stopped. Tor's voice came back to her, from the conversation she had not been part of, that had happened aboard the unregistered at the same moment. She had been standing in front of Dorath 7 showing him the manifest. They found the Haverson manifest. Which copy? 7 of 7. If there were 7 copies, and the manifest was a routing document, and routing documents travel with shipments. Marshal, she said, and now she could not keep her voice entirely level. The manifest we found. It was not lost when the ship was lost. It was in the ship that was lost, which means. A routing copy travels with a resupply shipment, Dorath 7 said. He was already there. He had arrived at it seconds before her. The ship wasn't carrying the document as a record. It was carrying it as a receipt. The hidden fleet had been resupplied through that vessel. Recently? Yes. Which means, he said, and his voice was absolutely even in a way that Verath recognized as controlled shock, that whatever position we calculate for that fleet based on the routing schedule, it is not their historical position. It is their current one. Aboard the Asterisk Unregistered, Ilara Voss was doing something that would have looked to an outside observer completely unremarkable. She was eating a meal. Real food. Chen had surrendered the actual coffee, and someone had produced a protein compound that, with sufficient goodwill, could be interpreted as resembling a meal her mother used to make on Sunday mornings back on Kepler Station. She ate it slowly. Tors sat across from her at the small table in the commander's mess, not eating, watching her. "You know they've found it," he said. "They found the copy," she said, "not the pattern." "They will." "Yes," she set down her utensil. "Tors, how many of our crew have family in the Meridian system?" He didn't answer immediately. The number was something they both knew and neither had named aloud, because nomming numbers like that made the weight of them too precise. 60% of the first wave, he said finally, maybe higher for the second. She nodded, and they volunteered anyway. "They volunteered because Asterisk," Tors said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said, "it's not." She stood, picked up the tray, and moved toward the door. Then she stopped with her back to him. "The Voth think we built this fleet as a last card to play," she said. "A hidden ace, something to deploy when we've exhausted conventional options." "Haven't we?" "No." She turned back, and her expression was the one she wore when she was explaining something she had known for a long time that the other person was only now reaching. "We built it as the Asterisk first Asterisk card. We've been playing it for 11 months. The conventional fleet, the 412 ships they counted." Tors went still. "Is the misdirection," she said. "The 412 ships exist so that they count them, so that they calculate a ratio, so that the math tells them they've won before the war finishes." He stared at her, then the fleet action at Meridian 4. "Is not the defense we're mounting because we have no choice," she said. "It is the stage we built for them to walk onto." Tors was silent for 10 seconds. She watched him work through it. "They're going to bring their full force," he said. "Yes. 3,000 ships against 412. That's what the math says. And when they commit their full force, we will know exactly where it is," she said quietly. "All of it, in one place, committed, no reserves, because they ran the math and the math was perfect." She picked up her coffee cup. "Get me the fleet commodore, it's time." Dorath 7 issued the order for full fleet convergence on Meridian 4 at 400 station time. It was the logical decision. The comprehensive census showed 412 human warships, most of which had already been engaged and attrited at the system's outer defensive perimeter over the preceding weeks. Current estimates place the surviving human defensive force at somewhere between 280 and 310 hulls. The margin was overwhelming. The timeline was optimal. The hidden fleet was still an unknown, but the strategic calculus was unchanged. Even adding the maximum estimated number from the shadow log, 1,400 ships, to the surviving human conventional fleet, the Voth maintained numerical superiority. They also maintained technological superiority. They had the position advantage of an attacking force with initiative. Dorath 7 ordered the convergence because it was correct. He was still correct. The math was still right. He was wrong about almost everything else. The asterisk certainty of outcome entered the Meridian system at the center of the Voth formation. 2,200 ships in the forward element, 800 in the second wave. Everything committed. The full weight of the most powerful military organization in the known galaxy pointed at a single system because the math demanded it. Verath stood at her secondary console and watched the tactical display update in real time. She saw the human defensive line. What remained of it? 304 warships positioned across the system's inner plane, conventional, expected, exactly where they should be. She saw the Voth formation begin its engagement approach. She was doing the math in her head, the same math everyone on the bridge was doing, the comfortable math of overwhelming advantage, when the first anomalous contact appeared on the sensor display. Not from the direction of the human defensive line. From behind them, from Obstruction 7 and the 14 other debris fields and dust clouds and sensor shadow regions distributed across the system's outer envelope. Not one contact, not a squadron. 1,041 contacts, simultaneously emerging from emission suppression at a range and vector that placed them not in front of the Voth formation. On its flanks, on its rear, on every axis that a formation commits when it is fully engaged with a force directly ahead. Marshal, the sensor officer said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone reporting something that their training has not prepared them for. There are. I see them, Dorath 7 said. Verath looked at the display. The human conventional fleet ahead was not retreating. It was not defending. It was positioning, spreading laterally, thin and deliberate, not to fight the Voth formation but to hold its attention, to keep every Voth gun pointed forward. The hidden fleet had not been a reserve. It had never been a reserve. It had been positioned for 11 months, patient, dark, moving through the spaces between the Voth's confident certainties, using the lanes the Voth's own convoys kept clear, serviced by ships the Voth had watched and categorized and dismissed, waiting not for a moment of desperation, but for the moment when the Voth's own logic would deliver them into this exact configuration. 3,000 ships with no room to reform, no reserve element, no second position, because the math had said a second position was unnecessary. How? The tactical officer started. They counted hours, Verath said, very quietly, mostly to herself, understanding arriving like cold water. They let us count theirs. They knew what number we needed to see to make the decision they needed us to make. Open a channel, Dorath 7 said. His voice was steady. He was still processing. He was still, on some institutional level, refusing to accept the conclusion his sensors were presenting. Open a channel to the human fleet. Now. Ilara Voss took the channel on the bridge of the unregistered, positioned at the leading edge of the hidden fleet's starboard arm, 200,000 kilometers from the nearest Voth hull. The voice that came through was measured, composed, and exhausted in a way that she recognized. The exhaustion of someone who has just done the math for the third time, hopping the answer will change. Human commander, Dorath 7 said, I would speak with whoever commands this. Speaking, she said. This engagement. He paused. You understood when you designed it that a significant portion of your forces would not survive the encirclement even if it was successful. It was not a question. She answered it anyway. Yes. You understood this from the beginning, when you built the fleet, when you positioned it. Yes. A long silence on the channel. Behind her, Tors stood completely still. We are not, Dorath 7 said carefully, able to negotiate from this position. You understand this as well. I'm not calling to negotiate, Marshal. Another silence, longer. Then why are you calling? She looked out through the forward viewport. The nothing, the absolute dark of space running suppressed, was gone now. The fleet was lit, its running lights visible across the void, 1,041 ships announcing themselves after 11 months of silence. In the middle distance, the Voth formation's lights were equally bright, and there were so many of them that they looked almost like a second starfield. Because you're going to lose this engagement, she said. And I wanted to make sure you understood that before it started so that what comes after is a choice and not a surprise. I'm not offering mercy, Marshal. I'm offering clarity. Tors made a small, controlled sound that might have been something other than what she took it for. You cannot guarantee your losses will be acceptable, Dorath 7 said. I never assumed they would be. He was quiet for almost 15 seconds. On the tactical display, both fleets held position, the moment between. What is it, he said finally, that you people are willing to lose? She had been asked versions of this question before, by her superiors when she had proposed the program, by the volunteers, late at night, in the engineering bays and mess halls of ships with 47 character designations that nobody used, by Tors, 3 minutes ago with a look instead of words. She had a different answer for each of them. To Dorath 7 she said, less than you're about to. The engagement lasted 9 hours. The Voth fought with precision and coordination, and the tremendous institutional competence of an organization that had been the dominant military force in the region for 4 centuries. They were not foolish. They were not cowards. They adapted in real time to a tactical situation their doctrine had not prepared them for. They destroyed 184 human ships. They lost the engagement anyway. Not because the math finally turned. It never fully turned. The Voth still had the numbers even flanked and encircled, and there were moments in the 4th and 6th hours where Dorath 7's tactical adjustments threatened to break the encirclement entirely. They lost because of the thing that had been true since the first engineer loaded onto the transports to obstruction 16 months ago, the thing that Varath had been orbiting without quite seeing it, the thing that was not in any manifest or routing document or sensor log. The human fleet fought as if losing was already priced in. Every Voth tactical adaptation assumed that a force taking unacceptable casualties would seek to preserve itself. It was a universal constant as far as Voth strategic doctrine was concerned. Pain limits behavior. Sufficient loss compels withdrawal. This was not cruelty. It was mathematics. It was true of every species the Voth had ever encountered. The encirclement held because the ships on the flanks didn't break when they started taking losses. They didn't consolidate. They didn't create exit corridors for their damaged elements. The unregistered lost its entire forward weapons array in the 6th hour, and Tors was running damage assessment with 3 fingers of one hand compressed against a shrapnel wound in his side. And Voss had rerouted power from the damaged array to the engine grid and pushed forward rather than back, because back was where the Voth needed them to go. You're going to bleed out, she told him, without taking her eyes off the display. I've done it before, he said. It's slow. Tors. Commander, I'll go to medical when you stop trying to fly us into the middle of the Voth fleet. I'm flying us into the edge of the Voth fleet. That's a meaningful distinction. It truly is not. The encirclement held. Varath was not on the bridge of the asterisk certainty of outcome when the engagement concluded. She had been moved to an interior compartment when the forward sections took damage in the 7th hour. She sat in a corridor with her back against the bulkhead and her analysis tablet in her hands, and she read the shadow log again. She read it differently now. The routing document wasn't just a logistics record. It was, she turned the thought over, it was a timeline. Each routing entry was dated. Each date corresponded to a position, a transit, a specific place the fleet had occupied for a specific window of time. She went back to the earliest entries, 16 months ago. The hidden fleet had begun assembling 12 months before the Voth had issued the proceed at optimal timeline directive. They hadn't built the fleet in response to the invasion timeline. They had built it in anticipation of the invasion timeline, before the Voth had formally calculated it. Which meant, she was very still for a moment, which meant that the 412 ships in the conventional fleet, the ones the Voth had found and counted and used to construct their confidence, had been assembled with the specific expectation that the Voth would find them, that the Voth would count them, that the count would inform a decision. The conventional fleet was not the real fleet that happened to have a hidden component. The conventional fleet was the bait. 140,000 humans had volunteered to crew 412 ships that their own military had already designated as likely to be destroyed, in order to provide a number that would make the enemy's decision obvious. Vareth put down the tablet. She thought about the human prisoners they had interviewed, about the behavioral responses that the analysts had described as unusual stress reactions and filed without deeper analysis. She thought about 17 people who had known about this fleet and had said nothing about it, not because they didn't know, but because they understood that their role in this war was to be captured and interviewed, and to give the Voth exactly enough information to feel confident, and no more. She put her head back against the bulkhead and looked at the corridor ceiling. Outside somewhere, the engagement was concluding. She could feel it in the way the vibrations through the hull had changed, the high, sharp percussion of active weapons exchange replaced by the slower, heavier sounds of a large structure under stress. The asterisk certainty of outcome was still fighting. It would fight for another 40 minutes before Doreth 7 issued the order she already knew was coming. She thought about the woman's voice on the command channel, the human commander who had called before the engagement started, not to gloat, not to negotiate, but to explain, to make certain that what came after was a choice. What does a civilization produce when it decides to fight like this, she thought. Not like a species that believes it will win, like a species that has accepted what winning costs and has decided the cost is payable, and has organized every component of its military strategy around the assumption that its own people are willing to be the payment. What is that? The ceasefire was negotiated over 4 days. Varath was part of the secondary analytical team that reviewed the terms. She was present in an observatory room when the formal documentation was processed, watching through the viewport as both fleets, visible now, all of them, no more dark running, held their positions across the Meridian system. 1,041 human ships, most of them damaged, many of them critically. 830 Voth ships remaining in formation, more of them than Varath had expected, and she had spent a day sitting with the guilt of having expected fewer. Doreth 7 was in the negotiation chamber. She could hear his voice through the corridor, measured, still, already thinking past this moment to the institutional consequences that a 400-year unbroken record of successful absorptions would not be able to absorb. Tors had made it. She had learned this from a data fragment in a human communication intercept that she had not been authorized to access and had accessed anyway. He was in medical, 3 fractured ribs and significant blood loss. The intercept noted that he had refused sedation twice, and that the medical officer had resolved the situation by threatening to put the sedative in his coffee, which he had apparently accepted as a reasonable use of authority. She found the commander's name in the same fragment. Ilara Voss, Commander, Hidden Fleet First Arm, operating under a program designation that had no public record in any human government database. A program that had been funded and crewed and built in the full knowledge that it was designed to operate in the space between official acknowledgement and practical reality. A program that had never been on any map. She stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the ships. One of them, a mid-size hull running on what the sensor ghost suggested was approximately 40% capacity, was positioned closest to the asterisk certainty of outcome asterisk. It had no visible designation on its hull. Its running lights were white and steady. She thought, they will want to understand us. After this, they will send analysts and historians and military theorists, and they will try to find the thing inside the human species that produces this, and they will describe it in precise clinical terms and build models of it, and construct elaborate explanations of the evolutionary or cultural pressures that generate a civilization willing to use its own certainty of loss as a strategic asset. They will never fully understand it. Not because it is complex, because it is simple in a way that rational analysis cannot reach. They will try to reduce it to biology or history or resource competition, and all of those things will be technically accurate, and none of them will touch the actual thing, which is just. People, she thought, who decided that something mattered more than the math. The asterisk certainty of outcome was renamed 3 months later. Dorath 7 requested the change personally. The new name did not appear in the official record. But Verath remembered it. He had named it Insufficient Premise Asterisk. She never saw Ilara Voss. The human commander did not attend the formal ceasefire proceedings. Verath later found a record indicating she had returned to Meridian 4 surface during the negotiations, to a settlement on the northern continent where she had apparently grown up. She had spent 2 days there. The record showed she had submitted a leave request through proper channels, which Verath found remarkable in a way she could not entirely articulate, and then remarkable in a way she absolutely could. Even then, even after, filling out the paperwork. The hidden fleet was decommissioned over the following year, partially. The official record noted that 312 hulls were retained in an unspecified operational status. Their designations remained 47-character alphanumeric strings. Their positions remained unlogged in the standard navigation registry. Verath filed her final analytical report 6 months after Meridian 4. Her superior accepted it without comment, except for one notation he added at the top of the document, which she did not see until it was archived. The notation read, "For future reference, when assessing a species' military capacity, do not count only what they have shown you. Count what they have decided you deserve to see. These are never the same number." She thought about the manifest she'd found on a dead cargo hauler. 1 document, 1 column, 7 routing copies, and the most important information in it was not the numbers in any of the columns. It was the existence of a column that the Voth's comprehensive, meticulous, 400-year refined intelligence apparatus had never known to look for. Not a hidden fleet, not a secret weapon, not a technological surprise. A category of thing that was not in the model. That had never needed to be in the model, because no civilization the Voth had ever encountered had used this kind of thinking. No civilization had built an entire strategic architecture around the assumption that their enemy's certainty was a weapon that belonged to them, if they were willing to pay the price of loading it. The Voth spent the next decade revising their intelligence doctrine. They added new categories, new methods, new analytical frameworks for detecting the things that a sufficiently motivated civilization might choose to make invisible. Every framework assumed the thing being hidden was a capability. None of them asked what a species was willing to sacrifice in order to be underestimated. None of them asked, because the answer required a kind of thinking that a rational civilization, conducting rational analysis, would file and move on from. The same way the Voth had once filed an encrypted transmission about 43 engineers reassigned to an unspecified location, and congratulated themselves on having cracked the cipher, and never once asked where the engineers had gone. Somewhere in the dark between stars, running at 40% capacity on scarred hulls with borrowed names, the ships that had never been on any map held their silent courses. They were not waiting.